All right, I think we can get started. We are happy to have Professor Andrew Weir as our speaker today. Professor Andrew Weir got his PhD from UMass Amherst in 2014. He's a syntactician as well as a semantist. He works on several phenomena, which include ellipsis, article drop, and yes/no particles in West Flemish. Today, the topic of his presentation is against meaning readings again, chaining again, and the semantics of change of state predicates. Now let's welcome Professor Andrew Weir.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be giving this talk to you. So I'm going to be talking about something a little different from what I normally talk about, which is ellipsis and such like things, as Leigh mentioned, but another phenomenon that has interested me for a while. Which is the behavior of the word again in English and in other languages, but in fact not so much the meaning of the word again, but rather what the meaning or meanings of again, the readings of again, can tell us about other things. So a rather familiar problem discussed for English again, and then also for other translation equivalents like wieder in German, is that there is an ambiguity in sentences like one, a well-known and well-discussed ambiguity in sentences like John opened the door again. This can have a repetitive reading where what again, the meaning that again contributes is that John had previously opened the door, but it can also have what's called a restitutive reading, where it simply means that the door had previously been open. John need not have opened it, and in fact there need never have previously been an opening. You can imagine a door that was built open and then it was closed, and then you say, and then John opened the door again. A similar kind of use, and maybe the same kind of use, can be seen in sentences like to, the temperature rose and then it fell again, or the car broke down but then I fixed it again. Here there's no, in a sentence like to be, you can say I fixed it again even if there was no previous fixing. The idea is either that the car was previously working, and that's what again is referring to, or this is sometimes also called a counter-directional reading, because the idea is that again is sensitive to you saying the car broke down, so a predicate that goes in one direction, and then I fixed it again, a predicate that goes in the other direction. The reason why this behavior of again has been taken to be of interest is because it's been taken as evidence for a particular treatment of verbs, change of state verbs, particularly like open, a particular treatment of their syntax. So a view that says verbs like open can be decomposed in the syntax into an eventive component, some kind of heads like cause and become, above a stative core, which refers to a state of the door being open. And the idea is that restitutive readings can be got by saying that again is taking scope only over that stative component. And crucially, this is a decomposition of these verbs in the syntax. It's not just a decomposition of their meaning components. It is a real syntactic decomposition. And the primary evidence for this, or one strong piece of evidence for this, that, for example, von Stechau discusses, is that if you change the position of again in the sentence, then you disambiguate. So if you have again in a position where it's not final in English, John again opened the door, that only has the repetitive reading. So John must have previously opened the door for this to be felicitous. And in German, if you slightly modify the position of wieder, if wieder is quite close to the verb, in something like weil Ottilie die Tür wieder öffnete, because Ottilie the door again opened, then you can get the restitutive reading. But if you place wieder a little bit higher in the clause, weil Ottilie wieder die Tür öffnete, you only, because Ottilie again the door opened, you only get the repetitive reading. And this is taken to follow from simply from the height of a junction of again in 4A and 4C. Again, the word order diagnoses a structurally high position for again, which cannot take scope only over the stative component. It must take scope over the eventive component. There is an alternative view for the meaning of again, which claims that the ambiguity is actually lexical. This is a matter of polysemy, of just having more than one reading of the word again. And this proposal suggests that again, I haven't spelled out the details here, but this proposal suggests that again can have a directly counter-directional presupposition. One thing it just can do is presuppose that the predicate again attaches to. There was previously mentioned some predicate that went in the opposite direction in some sense. And that's just one reading of one lexically specified reading of again, and there are other lexically specified readings of again, like the repetitive one. And maybe these are historically related, but synchronically they aren't. So this is meant to capture sentences like the temperature rose and then it fell again, or he walked 200 meters down the road, then he turned right, then he immediately turned left again. So there's a counter directionality. The turned left again is licensed by there previously having been a mention of turning right, something in the opposite direction. Now, one reason to doubt that lexical approach, that polysemy approach, firstly, one perhaps just doesn't want to posit ambiguity in the meaning of a word if it's not necessary. And in fact, we might think that that overgenerates. There are things that we might think are counter-directional, but that don't license again. So again doesn't have the same distribution as back in English. If you say he kicked me, so I kicked him, you can say back, but you can't say I kicked him again. With intending this to be licensed because you're saying you're kicking him back, you're doing something counter-directional. Or Mary wrote to John, and John wrote again to Mary is not grammatical. Interestingly, it was in an earlier stage of English. Beck and Gergel point that out. So it's not the case that it probably isn't the case that this is just the wrong kind of counter-directionality. It was possible for again to have this meaning, but modern English again doesn't have this meaning. So that might lead us to be suspect of an approach where counter-directionality is baked into one possible meaning of again. However, there are also reasons to perhaps doubt the structural approach where again has one meaning and the readings are a matter of scope in the clause. For verbs like open, this works very nicely, and verbs like open transparently have stative cores, or they're transparently built on stative predicates. So you can say the door is open, and that has no event implication. It was built that way, but there's no implication that this necessarily resulted from an event of opening. But there are other cases where this is less clear. So if you say the car broke down, but I fixed it again, what again is sensitive to there is telling you that the car was previously working, it seems. It doesn't mean that the car was previously fixed. If you say the car is fixed, you can use fixed in a stative use, as in 9b. But then if you do, then you must mean there was an event of fixing. It doesn't just mean that the car is working. Stative participles like fixed always have event implications, and that might be suspect. We might wonder then about the idea that verbs like fix are built on stative cores in the way that the von Stechau type of decomposition would require them to be. The core would have to be something like working, as shown in 10, but as far as I am aware, there's no independent morphological or syntactic evidence for proposing such a decomposition for a verb like fix. The only evidence for it, I think, is precisely the behavior of again, and maybe also something like I fixed it for 2 hours, meaning it continued to be working for 2 hours. But I think those are the only phenomena. So I'm going to enter into this debate or this discussion by discussing a completely different or an apparently completely different use of the word again, a way in which it can be used in English, which I don't think has been discussed before in the literature. And this is a use like the sentence in 11. You can say, Bergen is bigger than Trondheim, and Oslo is bigger again. And what this means is something like Oslo is yet bigger. Oslo is bigger than Bergen. Or one can say, I've worked in 3 countries. Working life was different in Belgium from the US, and in Norway, it's different again. And that means in Norway, it's different from Belgium. And here it's interesting to note that the meaning in 11 is not, if you say Bergen is bigger than Trondheim, if you say Oslo is bigger again, you don't mean Oslo is bigger than Trondheim, you mean Oslo is bigger than Bergen. That's what this means. And of course, an important thing to note about 11 and 12 is there's apparently no temporal meaning here. It can have a temporal meaning. If you say Oslo is bigger again, then that, of course, can mean something like Oslo was at one point big, then it was small, then it was bigger again. But that's not the reading that we get from these sentences. The reading here or that's not the necessary reading. There is a reading of 11 and 12 where there's just no temporality to the meaning of again here at all. And in Norwegian also, and in fact, I was thinking about this meaning of the word igjen, which means again. In Norwegian, it has actually a number of other uses in Norwegian, but it is the equivalent of again. And this has a use which is not quite available in English. I'm not completely sure why. I'll briefly speculate right at the end. Where the English translation would be something like in turn. So if you look up again in the Norwegian dictionary, one of the examples is Norway is divided into counties and these again into municipalities. So in English, we would say something like these are in turn divided into municipalities. Or a constructed example, Gary spoke with Anna, who again spoke with Andrew. And in English, that would be Gary talked to Anna, who in turn talked to Andrew. So Norwegian igjen has this in turn meaning very clearly. I'm going to call readings like this chaining readings of again. So the idea is that in a context where you've said Bergen is bigger than Trondheim, and then you say Oslo is bigger again, you mean than Bergen. The idea here is that Oslo, and I put it in brackets. You don't need to say the Van Bergen after again, but you can say the Van Bergen. Oslo is bigger than Bergen is the asserted part of what you say when you say Oslo is bigger again than Bergen. And the idea here is that there is a presupposed part, a presupposed relation, which is that Bergen is bigger than Trondheim. So here's this idea of chaining. What the idea here is that what again is doing is it's introducing a presupposition. It takes scope over a sentence where you're saying y stands in some relation r to x, and what the presupposition that again introduces is there is some z that stands in that relation to y. Right. So you see that this is the idea here is that chaining again attached to this sentence repeats the relation that's named in the sentence and presupposes that there's something else, you hopefully see this kind of chaining idea. More formally, we can specify this by saying that again takes a predicate that takes 2 arguments, and it will simply return that same predicate, but it will add a presupposition that there's the first argument of that predicate applies to some contextually salient thing, here gamma, and then the presupposition is what is originally the first argument. What's the first argument in the assertion here? Alpha is the second argument of the predicate in the presupposition, right? So to repeat again, if the predicate relates alpha to beta, then you assert that alpha is related to beta, and you presuppose that there's some gamma that stands in that same relation to alpha, to the first argument of the predicate in the assertion. And what I'm going to try to claim is that I'm going to have a fairly ambitious claim, which is that all the readings of again in English, both the in-turn reading or the chaining reading that I just discussed, and the restitutive reading and the repetitive reading can be derived from this general meaning if we do some reanalysis of the structure of change of state verbs. So I am going to propose a decomposition of change of state verbs, but it's going to be a different decomposition from the von Stechau type. But I think a decomposition that perhaps has some independent support. So to first step through how again works for these chaining cases, so the cases where I've kind of explicitly tailored the meaning to account for them. So cases like Belgium was different from the US. So I did, this is true, right? I did live in the US and then I lived in Belgium and then now I live in Norway. Belgium was different from the US and Norway is different again, meaning Norway is different from Belgium. If we take a fairly simple meaning of different, just saying it takes two arguments and it just says that the two arguments are different, then different again will spit back that exact same predicate, but it will presuppose if this predicate says y is different from x, then there will be a presupposition that x is different from some z, where z is salient. And then if we put in Norway and from Belgium, the assertion will be Norway is different from Belgium, but the presupposition will be that Belgium is different from some salient z, right? And that presupposition is met because you mentioned in this discourse it was mentioned that Belgium was different from the US. And here there's a word order effect. Again, has to be in exactly that position to get this reading. So Norway is different again, gets the chaining reading, but if you say something like Norway again is different, or Norway is different from Belgium again, or again Norway is different from Belgium, all of those are grammatical as such, but they have a temporal reading. Something has changed. That's not okay on this chaining reading, where all you're doing is saying this relation also held between two different things, also holds between two different things. And that's predicted here structurally. Again, is modifying the adjective different here, so it has to be right up close to the adjective different to get the types right. Considering a sentence like Bergen is bigger than Trondheim and Oslo is bigger again, here again needs to modify some predicate that looks like lambda x lambda y is bigger than x. And that might be possible if you maybe imagine scoping Oslo and Bergen. Maybe you can move them to create that right abstraction, but you can do something more direct, which is apply again to the comparative morpheme here in bigger. So here is a somewhat simplified possible syntax of these comparatives. So the assumption is that in Oslo is bigger than Bergen. That's actually an elided clause. It's Oslo is bigger than Bergen is big, but is big is elided. And the comparative morpheme, ignore the again for the moment, the comparative morpheme ER takes first the than clause and then combines with Oslo big here, again is being attached to the comparative morpheme. The two, if I go back to the tree, so these bits, Oslo big and the comparative clause than Bergen big, are predicates of degrees. Predicates of degrees, the set of degrees to which Oslo is big and the set of degrees to which Bergen is big, respectively. And the comparative morpheme takes these two sets of degrees and basically says that that one of them has a bigger maximum than the other. So Oslo is bigger than Bergen means that the extent to which Oslo is bigger than the extent to which Bergen is big. That's how to read this. If you attach again to this meaning from ER, which and here the point always throughout this talk will be again can modify things where you have two arguments that are of the same type, starting the predicate. And here we've got that. We've got a predicate that takes two arguments which are sets of degrees. Attaching again to this will again get you this presupposition. You're saying D2 is bigger than D1, and then there's a presupposition that then D1 is bigger than some salient D3. So if you say Bergen is bigger than Trondheim, but Oslo is bigger again, then your assertion is Oslo is bigger than Bergen, but then the presupposition is that the extent to which Bergen is bigger than some previously mentioned salient set of degrees, and you have previously mentioned that because you previously mentioned Trondheim. So you can get this presupposition is met here. And again, again has to be in precisely this position to get this reading. Oslo is bigger again. Has to be right up close to the adjective, which is what we would hope for on this analysis. If you put it in any other position, Oslo is bigger than Bergen again, or Oslo again is bigger than Bergen, or again Oslo is bigger than Bergen. Again, these are grammatical as such, but they have some temporal reading. Again, something has changed. You don't get this reading, which is merely I have mentioned some similar thing before, which stands in this chaining type relation. Only 28a has that reading. So that works for this meaning of chaining again, which is not surprising because it's been designed to work for this kind of case. What we now want to consider is whether and how this might extend to the other readings of again. Can we get the other readings of again just from this quite simple chaining reading? And of course, I'm going to suggest that we can, otherwise I wouldn't have written, written the talk. So let's start from what has previously been said about again, repetitive again. So a previous kind of denotation that has been given would say that again is it takes a predicate of events as argument, and then it just returns that same predicate of events, but it presupposes that there was some salient previous event to which that predicate applies. So if you say John danced, then John danced again. Here again is modifying danced, or John dance actually, and it will just give you the predicate of events of John dancing, but it will presuppose that there's some contextually salient event, which was also an event of John dancing, which is prior to the event in the assertion. So this denotation for again bakes in the temporal precedence into again. I'm going to try to get the effect of repetitive again with my chaining again, which doesn't have a temporal component built into it. It can't, because the examples we just saw, Oslo is bigger again, those examples didn't have any temporal meaning. So in order to do this, we'll consider what I assume the verbal spine looks like, and what the semantics of the verbal spine is at various points. And we'll note the fact that I think there's actually precisely one position when we have repetitive readings, at least, where again takes scope, and that's over aspect. So again takes scope precisely here. everything below aspect, sorry, is included in the presupposition of again, everything above is not. There's no other adjunction site, or there's no other place where again modifies the uh, the the description of the event or anything like that. So firstly, and this is actually a little bit complicated, but at least for these cases of intransitive or unergative verbs, again, must include the agent, must include the external argument. So John danced and then Mary danced again isn't felicitous because you've changed the agent. So then the assumption is that again must be taking scope, or the way to analyze that is saying again must be taking scope at least above where the agent is introduced, the external argument. It also takes scope above something like perfective aspect in English. So in English, you can have imperfective was eating, or you can have perfective in simple past. So not perfect, which would be have eaten, but perfective, which is the completed action entailment of the simple past. If you say Mary was eating her spaghetti when she was interrupted, you can't then follow that up with and then she ate her spaghetti again. And the reason you can't follow that up, the reason that doesn't work, is because again is taking scope here. The presupposition of again seems to include the completed action of eating her spaghetti, and that we can capture if we say again has to take scope above perfective aspect in the verbal spine. Oops. Oops. Sorry. But of course, again, takes scope below tense. You can vary the tense between the kind of background clause and the clause that again attaches to with no problem. So John danced at some point, and he is dancing again now, and he will dance again. Tense can vary. And I think that this is not quite expected on a denotation for again, where it takes scope over something like predicates of eventualities. It depends exactly how you define it. But I take from this that we want to establish that repetitive again, or we want some analysis of again that will capture the fact that it in the verbal spine it seems to adjoin exactly here, at least when we're not talking about restitutive readings, which we'll get to. But these repetitive readings, something happened and then something of the same kind happened again, that takes scope over perfective or over aspect. I think that can be captured given certain, I think, natural denotations for the meanings of these bits of the verbal spine. So if if voice, so the point at which you've introduced, or little v, doesn't matter. If the point at which you've introduced the external argument is a predicate of events, aspect, I take to look something like this. So if you introduce perfective aspect, what that part of the verbal spine will mean will be it's a function that will take a topic time and it will return a proposition, so a predicate of worlds, saying there is some event of John dancing. So it's existentially closing this denotation. There is some event of John dancing, and the topic time and the world are in the same world, identifying the topic time with the world that you're in the proposition. And the runtime of E, this means the kind of the temporal trace of the event, the length of the event, is contained within the topic time. So this is a kind of Reichenbach approach to Reichenbach-Klein approach to tense and aspect. Perfective aspect means there's a topic time and the event you're talking about is contained within the topic time. The function of tense, of past tense, is to give you that topic time. So this is a pronominal treatment of tense. The in past tense gives you some contextually given topic time with a presupposition that it's before the utterance time. And then if you plug that into the denotation for aspect, what you'll get is a proposition where you say there's an event of John dancing, and that event is entirely contained within some salient past topic time, and that past topic time is in the world of evaluation for this proposition. And here, so my suggestion is going to be there's only one of these denotations which has that magic thing I pointed out. You have two arguments. Only 37 is the right type to be modified by chaining again. And here I'm playing a little trick, which is to say to treat times and worlds as actually being the same type of thing. So maybe something like situations. Again, take scope over aspect because that's the only thing that chaining again can modify. It's the only thing that has two arguments. How is this actually going to work? What happens when you attach chaining again to that part of the verbal spine attached again above perfective aspect? So here I repeat the denotation for the verbal spine up to perfective aspect. That's the assertive bit. The presuppositional part is going to say there's some other event of John dancing, and there's some salient time that has been mentioned, which is in the same world of evaluation as the topic time in the original assertion, and the runtime of the event, this new event of John dancing that we're talking about, is contained within that that salient topic time. Right. So the presupposition of chaining again here will give you that there's some other event that has the same description as the event that you're taking scope, that again is taking scope over here. And that event is contained within some salient time, some different salient time. Right. So for example, the time that is given when you make the original, the kind of background assertion, John danced. Now that's what we want, right? We want that again gives us there's some other event in addition to the asserted event, which is contained within some salient, some other salient time. Except that one might object, well, there's no ordering here of the times. There's nothing in this denotation. There's nothing enforcing that this salient time is before the time mentioned in the assertion. So you predict to be good in this view, something like John danced on November the 1st. He danced again on October the 1st. And that's, at least when presented like that, that's I think judged as somewhat deviant. But on this view, it would be predicted as good, right? I mean, all that you require on this denotation for again is that there should be some salient time which is different from this one in which there was a completed dancing, and that's met here. I'm going to bite the bullet and say actually that's a desirable outcome, because actually sentences like that are good once you have enough supporting context, once you have a very clear context in which your narrative is going back in time. So here's an example of such a context. If A says, this is the first time that stocks and bonds have plunged in value at the same time, and B says, no, that isn't true. Let's scroll back through the charts, through the data, through the graphs, starting from today. If we go back to 2012, we can see that they both plunged pretty badly then too. And then if we look further back, they plunged again in 2008. Then we can say that they plunged again in 1975. They're always plunging simultaneously. This narrative sounds pretty good. And I think what is going on here is the reason why again normally has an anteriority effect. The reason why again will normally presuppose, or one normally gets the intuition that John danced again, that the again refers to or presupposes something in the past, is because when you establish salient times in the discourse, they nearly always come before the current topic, the topic time that you're currently dealing with, because narratives normally move forward in time. That's where the anteriority effect, the past effect of again, comes from. Once you clearly have a going back in time narrative, then actually again's presupposition on the repetitive view can be met by events which are in the future with respect to the assertion. So you can say something like they plunged again in 2008 and have again's presupposition met by by a plunging in 2012 if you've set up the narrative such that the plunging in 2012 is clearly established before you mention the plunging in 2008. So I think it's actually a good thing that there is no temporal component baked into the semantics of again here. I don't think that there should be. I think that temporal effect is derived pragmatically. This contrasts, however, with counterdirectional readings or restitutive readings. So to remind us of what a counterdirectional reading is, this is so if we have a sort of normal forward-going narrative, let's scroll forward through the price chart, through the graph from 2000 to now for some stock. If we go forward to 2008, the stock price was high but plunged. In 2012, it rose again. So here, again's presupposition is apparently being met, saying rose again is being met either, and this is not clear, this is something that requires analysis, against presupposition is being met either by there having the stock's price previously having been high, and the rise is restitutive of that previous highness, or it's the presupposition of again is being met because there was a previous counter-directional event, so that it's being the presupposition of it rose again is met by the fact that there was previously a plunging. And it's not actually immediately clear which of those is correct. But the point is that in it rose again in 44 is not presupposing that there was a previous rising. It's presupposing either that the stock price was previously high or that there had previously been a fall in the stock price. That really does have a temporal component to it. So if you try to do the same sort of looking back in time, then this doesn't work. If you say let's scroll backwards through the chart from now going back to 2000, if we go back to 2012, the stock price was high but plunged, and in 2008 it rose again. You can't say again in 45, even though you've previously mentioned a plunging, and even though you've previously mentioned the stock price being high, that's not enough in 45 to license the use of again. Right? Again really does seem to care in this meaning, in this restitutive meaning or counter-directional reading. Again really does seem to care about um, the state of the stock price being high or the plunging, whatever it is that's licensing this restitutive or counter-directional again in 44, that really does have to be before the event that you're attaching again to. So that really does matter. I think this contrast, if you weren't persuaded by the going back in time example on the previous slide, I think that the contrast in between 45 and the examples on the previous slide make those intuitions clear that there's a contrast between these kinds of examples. But it means we'll have to have something to say about this reading. We have to have something to say about it in general. Of course, we want to capture its semantics, but we also need to have something to say about the fact that temporality does seem to be baked in to this reading of again. So here I'm going to consider whether my chaining meaning of again, or to what extent my chaining meaning of again, can be used in these counter-directional or restitutive examples, like the car broke down but then I fixed it again. So there's something being chained here. Oops, sorry, pressed the wrong button. So there's something being chained in something like 46. Here, my proposal, my idea is going to be that fix the car at some level of decomposition, so some part within the VP that we pronounce as fix the car, denotes a relationship between a start state and an end state of the car. And what the chain is, so if the assertion of fix is there was a move from a non-working state, which was the start of the fixing, to a working state, which was the end of the fixing, the chain is that that start state, when the car wasn't working, was the end state of some other transition. And that would be the breaking down, right? So if there's some previous transition or some other transition where the car moves from a working state to a non-working state, that's what again is presupposing. That's the chain here. But then one needs to have some kind of relation that links the non-working state to the working state, but which also links the working state to the non-working state. Right? There has to be some R. And this won't be fix, right? This won't be the normal, what we think of as the meaning of the word fix. Fix only names a transition from non-working to working. What we need is something that's sufficiently general that it can both name a transition from non-working to working and a transition from working to non-working. That's what we need to find. And that's what I'm going to decompose um, verbs like fix into to give us this relationship. I think an important insight here is going to be that the change of state predicates that we're interested in here are gradable. So you can say something like I partially fixed the car, or I completely fixed the car, or I only fixed the car to a certain extent. And if these predicates are gradable, then this suggests that there are degree arguments involved. So it's not just transitions between states, but it's also transitions between degrees of workingness or degrees of fixedness of the car. So 48 is a big long denotation, and this is the denotation for the VP that's pronounced as fix the car at some point in when it's been kind of built up in the clausal spine, as we'll see that I actually want to kind of decompose this and zoom into the fine detail of this VP a bit more. But at some point, we want the verb phrase fix the car to be a predicate of events which says there's some start degree and some end degree and some start state and some end state, such that the car was at some degree of workingness at the start, and it was at some degree of workingness at the end, and the degree of workingness at the end was bigger than the degree of workingness at the start. And the start and end are temporally ordered as well in the way that you would expect. There has been work on again with respect to these scalar predicates, but with a quite different analysis from what I'm proposing. Another ingredient that's going to be crucial for me concerns the ontology of degrees, and in particular, the idea that there is a distinction between positive and negative degrees. And this comes from, this is from Chris Kennedy's work. This comes from, this is put to use in these polar opposite adjectives like tall and short. So intuitively, tall is the positive member of that pair and short is the negative one. And the idea is that positive adjectives like tall, degrees of tallness are sets of points on a scale which stretch from the lower bound, which is here 0 centimeters, upwards. So Kirsty is taller than Stephen. The reason that's true is that if you count all the degrees of height that Kirsty has starting from 0, then you get to 0 centimeters, 1 centimeter, and so on up to 180 centimeters. Whereas with Stephen, you might count 0, 1, and so on, only up to 179 centimeters. And because the set of Kirsty's degrees of height is bigger than the set of Stephen's degrees of height, then Kirsty is taller than Stephen is true. But for negative adjectives like short, the idea is that these name degrees on the scale of height which are negative. Negative degrees means you start from the upper bound, which might be infinity. Right? Height doesn't have an upper bound, and you move down. So Stephen is shorter than Kirsty works because Kirsty's degrees of shortness start from an infinity centimeters and then work down to 181 centimeters and 180 centimeters, and then it stops. But Stevens will work down from infinity down to 181, 180, and then 179 centimeters. And then Stevens' degree of shortness, Stevens' negative degree of height, which is a kind of mind-bending concept. Stevens' negative degree of height is bigger than Kirsty's negative degree of height. And that's what captures the truth of Stephen is shorter than Kirsty. That's the idea here. So here my proposal is going to be that verbs like fix and break are decomposed in the syntax, but they're not decomposed into something like cause become working or cause become broken. Rather, they both have a core which has a rather abstract root which simply names something like a scale of, and here it's difficult to name the scale because if I say workingness, that already implies kind of positivity. Working or brokenness, but not whether that degree is positive or negative. That's what's factored out of the denotation. Right? So if you have it, you can have a tree that looks like this. You have this root, abstract root that's introducing this scale, and it has an internal argument. If pos is introduced above that, then this will be spelled out as fix, and then you can use your favorite theory of spell out here. It spans, or this raises to here, and whatever you like. That same root, that same scale, if it takes scope under negative, under a head that I've called neg, then it will spell out as break. That's the idea here. And to preview the analysis, we're going to get the counter directional reading of again by letting again take scope under the specification of whether the degrees being talked about are positive or negative. Right, so to step through, and here there's a lot of lambdas on this slide. To step through the meaning, the idea here is that these roots will take an internal argument, and then they introduce a transition between pairs and degrees of states, and they say that the degree gets bigger in that transition between states. So that's what 53 says. So you can give that an internal argument. And then you have a relationship between a pair of start degrees and start states and a pair of end degrees and end states. And then pos and neg will take those, take predicates that look like that, and then we'll existentially close all these arguments, these degree and state arguments, and give you a description of an event, which is a transition between those states, but it will also give you whether the degrees in question are positive or negative. That's the idea here. So if you attach pos to this root combined with the car, then what you're saying is there's a transition between a start state and start degree and an end state and an end degree, in which the car ends up with a higher positive degree of workingness by the end. So that's what fix means. If you have neg, then you're still saying there's an increase of some degree of workingness of the car, but it's an increase of a negative degree of workingness. So you can think of that as an increase in the degree of brokenness. If you have an increase of a negative degree of workingness, that's break or breakdown. That's the idea here. And then the idea, as I said, is that if you get again to take scope before you've introduced this pos or neg head, then that's our magic R. That's our R that's underspecified enough that it can be the correct chain that links a non-working state of the car to a working state, but it also links a working state to a non-working state. That's the idea. So if you attach again, and also you have this is again the magic lambdas here, the two lambdas that have arguments, two arguments of the same type. This is the right type for chaining again to take scope over. And here the presupposition that this will give you is there was some salient state and workingness degree pair of the car. So what this is taking scope over, say this is eventually going to be positive and taking scope, what we're saying is I fixed it again. If you have again taking scope this low, what you're saying is that there was some previous event in which there was also an increase of the car's degree of fixedness or brokenness. That's the idea here. That's what we want for the counter-directional reading. So that the presupposition here can be that if you say the car broke down, but then I fixed it again, the assertion is that there was a transition from a small positive degree of workingness to a big positive degree of workingness. The presupposition is that there was a previous transition from a small negative degree of workingness to a big negative degree of workingness. So it broke down previously. That's what we want. And here, importantly, so I'll go back at slide. Here, I have baked in to the meaning of the roots, to the meaning of the change of state verbs. I've baked in temporal precedence, and so that temporal precedence will be kind of picked up by the chaining presupposition of again. So we'll correctly see an effect of temporal precedence here of again, but without building it into the denotation of again itself, which I think is a good result. I think we don't want to bake temporal precedence into again. This meaning of change of state verbs bakes in the fact that they're transitions as well, and that I think captures the fact that things like the car is fixed always has a change of state implication. It always has an event implication. It doesn't just mean that the car is working, which one might predict it to mean if this was decomposed, if fix was cause become working, which is what von Stecker would have to have it as, you might expect that reading to be possible, but it isn't. The scope behavior, though, we retain the advantage of the structural account, which was that the position of again disambiguates. And again, here, the position of again will disambiguate in exactly the same way as von Stecker had it. Again, to get the restitutive reading, you're going to have to adjoin again very low in the structure, very, very low between the root and the external argument, but no higher. If you adjoin it at any higher position, or if you adjoin it above aspect, which is the only other place I think you can adjoin it, then you'll get the repetitive reading. So we preserve that insight of the structural view. We also get cases where it's not necessary for the previous change of state to be counter-directional. It could be in the same direction. I think that we observe in cases like John kicked the box, then Mary kicked it again. So here we apparently do have a case where I said that the agent, the subject, can't change between sentences, but here it can, apparently. And the important point here, what distinguishes this from dance, is that you have an internal argument here, an object which is affected. Its state changes. And this is, I think this is actually a kind of restitutive is not the right word, but you're simply saying that there have been two transitions which are both in increases in degrees of kickedness. So the box gets more kicked each time. These readings only work when there's an affected object that you can say there's been a transition in its state. So you can only have these changes of subject when you have an internal argument. The facts are actually a little bit more complicated than this, but certainly something like John danced, then Mary danced again doesn't work. But also somewhere where the object is not affected, John contemplated the scenery. There's no change of state in the scenery. You can't say then Mary contemplated the scenery again. The only place where this kind of thing works is somewhere where you can say there's been a repeated transition in the state of the internal argument. Now, I criticised the von Steckow decomposition for saying there was no morphological or syntactic evidence for part of the decomposition that was proposed. And so therefore it's incumbent on me to show that there is morphological or syntactic evidence beyond just the meaning of again to support the decomposition that I propose. So we'd like to see overt evidence for pos or these, what I'm calling pos or neg heads. I don't know if we do for pos. I assume that pos is the unmarked case, but I think we do for neg. In English, we have these reversal prefixes un and d. So there are lots of pairs like fix and break and appear and vanish and rise and fall, which are lexicalized, but then there's also a productive process, and especially if you coin new verbs, if you derive verbs, something like unfriend in the social media context, these take un as a neg head or d. So you have things like fill, unfill, block, unblock, zip, unzip, friend, unfriend, follow, unfollow again in social media. So and these work with counter directional again. So I friended him, but then I saw his political opinion, so I immediately unfriended him again. So I think that there is evidence for neg, which is this reversal un. So in conclusion, then, I've argued that again in English has no temporal semantics built in. And we diagnose that, we learn that from sentences like Bergen is bigger than Trondheim, but Oslo is bigger again. Rather, its inherent meaning is this chaining meaning. I think that on certain plausible assumptions about the meaning of aspect, I think this meaning can also deliver repetitive readings, as well as restitutive and counter-directional readings, given, again, a certain view of the decomposition of change of state predicates into a positive or negative head and a transition of degrees. There are, of course, as always, some remaining queries. I wonder a bit why igjen in Norwegian has a reading which is lacking an intern reading in English. And I wonder if maybe this is somehow, there's a difference in the kind of derived predicate that can be created by scope movements between the two languages. I haven't tried to investigate that in detail. There are, of course, other domains where people have tried to investigate again, in particular Siegfried Beck, in things like double object constructions, arguably have been argued to diagnose a covert possession component of double object constructions, like Tylo gave Satoshi a flag again, meaning Satoshi previously had a flag. And I need to check out whether that's capturable on this analysis. And similarly, something like John went to the store again, which can mean simply he had previously been at the store. So these remain to be worked out on the current analysis. Thanks again. Another remaining mystery.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have 20 minutes for QA. So any questions? So Vanessa. Hello, Vanessa.
Frozen.
Yeah. Bad internet connection. Can you hear me, Vanessa? Or anyone else?
Okay,
Professor Liu.
okay. Hi, Andrew. I really enjoy your talk.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. First, I want to make some clarification. In your talk, you say the sentence like Oslo is again bigger than Belgium. Here we get the repetitive reading, right?
Right.
And then if the sentence is Oslo is bigger again than Belgium, then we get a restitutive reading, right?
So what would a restitutive reading? I'm not. I think the restitutive reading and the repetitive reading are the same there. I think what we get there is what I call the chaining reading, but we also can get the repetitive and restitutive reading, which I think are going to be the same thing there, or at least I can't immediately tease them apart.
Okay. And then in your talk, you try to argue for they exist some kind of interaction relation between the interpretation of again and aspect, right? Okay, so I'm quite interested in the Chinese phenomena that might be related to what you talk about. In Mandarin Chinese, okay, if I want to say John is taller than Bill, then we have to say John, then Bill, and tall. Okay, John, that means John, then Bill, tall. That means John is taller than Bill. Now suppose we have a sentence like this: John, again, then Bill, tall. Here, based on my intuition, I can get the repetitive reading and restitutive reading. That means this sentence is ambiguous. It's ambiguous for me. Okay, and then if we change this sentence, okay, into the following: John, again, then Bill, tall, and then we put an aspect, a sentence final particle in some sense, which can be regarded as a kind of aspect marker, okay? Like, for example, John, again, then Bill, tall, and aspect marker. Here we can only get the repetitive reading. It's very, very interesting because in English, we know again can occur in a position before bigger or occur behind bigger. But in Mandarin Chinese, the position of again is fixed. So that means we have to use a different kind of strategy to induce different reading. If we do not insert an aspect marker, okay, at the end of the sentence, then the sentence might be ambiguous between the so-called repetitive reading and restitutive reading. But we insert an aspect marker, okay, then we can only get the repetitive reading. Okay, so I don't know whether this is compatible with your the idea you want to argue in your talk. Okay, this is my first question. And my second question is this. In your talk, okay, you talk something about the chaining again. And in contrast with the chaining again, we might say the so-called non-chaining again. Okay, so in sentence like Oslo is again bigger than Belgium versus Oslo is bigger again than Belgium. Okay, I'm interested in knowing, okay, how the so-called chaining again differs from the non-chaining again in the dimension of measurement. Okay, as you want to argue in your talk, you might not want to say, okay, here that the temporal interpretation, I mean the temporal sequence plays an important role in the interpretation of such kind of sentences. So I'm interested in knowing, okay, if the temporal sequence is not so important here, and then how can we get the so-called chaining again reading and the so-called non-chaining again reading? Okay, this is my second question. Okay, may I have another question?
Sure, but maybe I'll
Okay,
answer
okay,
both of
okay,
those now so that I
okay.
keep them in my head, but also because
Okay.
I think that the answer, to the extent that I have an answer, might be the same for both points, I think. So I may not have completely understood your question, but I think that if I think what this question boils down to for English and understanding the temporal reading, I'll call it temporal rather than repetitive or restitutive. So that the reading of again that really in something like Oslo again is bigger than Bergen, where you're really saying that some change has taken place, and that's what again is talking about, which seems also to be what you diagnose when you add an aspect marker like le to the Mandarin sentence. What that is going to have to boil down to, and I don't immediately know how to spell this out, but what that's going to have to boil down to is saying that there can be some reading of an English sentence like Oslo is bigger than Bergen, which is brought out if you say something like Oslo is now bigger than Bergen. So if we add now in English, then we get, and then if we have both now and again, so Oslo is now bigger again than Bergen, then again one clearly gets the temporal reading. So I think that there has to be some way, something like kind of hidden aspect or something in a sentence like Oslo is bigger than Bergen, where one reading of that sentence without the again, right, nothing to do with the again, one reading of that sentence can be something like Oslo has become bigger than Bergen, kind of stative outcome of some event, which I think then is brought out. Mandarin seems, up from what you said, Mandarin I think brings that out by adding the aspectual particle. It sounds like that, right? So then what needs to be worked out, and here I don't have an answer, it's something I think I need to go and think about, is to what extent how is that inference about Oslo is bigger than Bergen can have this kind of resultative or outcome of a growing reading? Is that's actually encoded in English, perhaps silently, in some choice of aspect in that sentence? Mandarin Chinese encodes it explicitly, or is it kind of captured by some other means? I would like it to be captured syntactically, perhaps implicitly and silently in English, because then I think I can tell a story about what again would be modifying. Again, could be taking scope over some sort of silent aspect in the English case. Right? So I think that's the answer. Hopefully that kind of answers both questions, or at least partially answers both questions.
Yeah, quite nice. Yeah.
So Vanessa, you can ask questions now.
For me, at least, Vanessa is still frozen.
Vanessa? No? So Professor Liu, do you have another question?
Yeah. In your talk, when you talk about Chris Kennedy's positive degree and the negative degree, it seems you borrow the idea of distributive morphology, because I see some kind of roots there. And then you also propose the pause and the neck as a kind of like category, right? But actually, if my my knowledge of distributive morphology is correct. Under the theory of distributive morphology, like category is used to identify the category of the root, right? So here, if you assume you use some kind of like category, like a pause and a neck, it is simply used to identify the degree as positive or negative. So I'm interested in how can you make your analysis compatible with the typical assumption of distributive morphology?
Right. So I think, let's see here. So two kinds of answer to that. The first one is that I'm not a morphologist and I'm not very worried about making my assumptions necessarily conform or not conform to what distributed morphology would right. So I'm not actually trying to make any commitments. You will notice that none of my trees had category labels on them. Actually,
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
all I'm suggesting is that the decomposition has to be a
Yeah.
certain way in terms of the meanings of all these things. And then I think arguments about the morphosyntax or what that leads us to conclude about the morphosyntax and things like categorization. I am content to let be someone else's problem, but I think that one could, and this needs to be investigated more, one could perhaps see pos and neg as being something like verbalizers,
Yeah.
as transforming the root into not just specifying pos or neg um, on a scale, but also making the whole thing verbal. And the denotation I give here for pos and neg would be at least compatible with that view, because the denotation I give here takes this predicate of which relates start state to end state, and then does quite a lot of existential binding and gives you a predicate of events. It introduces an event variable. So that would be at least compatible, I think, with kind of normal views about what something like little v does. Right? But I also say I'm not necessarily committed to that, and I think that actually kind of fine-grained, both semantic and morphological investigation would be necessary to make a to make a determination there.
Okay, I guess Vanessa simply write down her question. Yeah.
Yeah, in the chat box.
Right. So the question is, so the electricity went off, but then I switched it back on again, which works. Now how would that? There is no degree here. So two things to note about that. I think that I think perhaps the crucial point is not that the actual situation necessarily has sort of an immediate switch from kind of high to low, but that in principle the predicates involved are gradable. And I think that these ones, well, certainly the electricity went off I mean, you can say something like the electricity partially went off, although then you might sort of wonder, does that mean over a partial area? So maybe that's not the right modifier. I see that I switched it back on again, doesn't very neatly, is kind of awkward to say I switched it partially back on again, I think. So I think that one just has to, yes, I think I just have to take that one as a problem, as something to think about. What I will also note, though, although I don't quite know what to say about it, is that the example there would be I switched it back on again And there it is possible to say the electricity is on again. So again is somehow taking scope over on. Now, with that said, so what is being restituted, what is being restored, is the state of the electricity being on. Now, with that said, I don't immediately see how to integrate that kind of case into chaining. I think that the whatever the answer is to that, it's going to have to be the same answer. And I don't know what the answer is, but whatever the answer ends up being, it's going to have to be the same answer. Let's see here, as whatever the answer is to this question on this view. So the John went to the store again can mean he had previously been at the store. So here the hope, and I can only express this as a vague hope at the moment, is that these prepositional phrases like to the store, but also maybe the particles in something like switch the power on, maybe they denote something like paths. They are they have something transitional. They also name kinds of transitions, maybe not transitions of degree exactly, but some other kinds of transition, which maybe again chaining again can hook onto. But I need to think more about it. So thanks a lot for the question, and thanks for the example.
So any other questions from other students? No? Okay, I have one question. So Mandarin, the Mandarin counterpart of again is yo and zai. So both of which have vowel tones. And yo, let's talk about yo. So yo can be used to express a repetition and restitution. And it can also be used to express continuation, like this one. So in Mandarin Chinese, we can say this kind of sentence. So John ate 2 apples yesterday, and today he again drank 2 bottles of Coke. So this is a kind of continuation, and we can use yo again, yo, which is again here. And I think your model should be able to account for this use of again in Mandarin Chinese. However, yo is very interesting because so yo used to give me a hard time about 20 years ago. So in Mandarin Chinese, we can say this one, okay? So should mean that a friend of mine asked me this question. Do you think John knows the answer to this question? Then my answer is this one. Of course, he does. He, again, not an idiot. Okay? And do you think your model can account for this phenomena? So let me say this in Mandarin Chinese. 他又不是白痴, okay? He, again, not an idiot. And in this case, so nothing is repeated, nothing is restituted, and nothing is continued, I mean, from my point of view. But somehow we need to use this kind of again in this sentence. So how should we account for this fact in terms of your analysis?
So that one I don't know. So the first one you mentioned, where which doesn't work in English. So yesterday John ate
2
pizza.
apples.
Today he drank again 2 Cokes or something. That seems. I'm not certain that I don't know whether my analysis can quite handle that, because everything is changing between the sentences and except for the agent. So I'm not sure that my analysis can handle that. I note that I have been told by a German-speaking colleague that German again, wieder, can do something quite similar, and it seems to simply mean something like, I have said something like this before. It can have a meaning something like that. And then of course the question is exactly how to cash that out. And that I think, this is again not an answer, but this somehow belongs, I think, to this this class of problem, where again can actually attach to lots of things like speech acts as well, also like questions. So the examples like, what was your name again? Meaning remind me of your name. And so I think that one can imagine perhaps trying to work that out, maybe also in terms of focus, and focus giving you kind of abstractions over things, focus on things that differ, kind of giving you variables in the right slots such that chaining again might work. I have no idea how to deal with cases like he's again not an idiot. None. I fear I would have to just to sort of give up there and say there really is something like homophony, right? That's just a different word. If anyone has any clever ideas about how to link it to any meaning of again, then I would be happy to hear them.
Yeah, it seems to me that we need to figure out which part of the sentence, either syntactic one or semantic one, to be modified by this again. And somehow, maybe we need to come up with some pragmatic analysis or components that could be modified by again as well. I mean, in Mandarin Chinese.
Yeah. Do you have any sense in those sentences like he's again not an idiot? I mean, this is asking you to do analysis, I understand, but do you have any sense of that expressing any sense of repetition, or even, or is it something like contrast? Like,
you mean by saying this sentence?
Yeah, so something like, despite what you apparently think, he's not an idiot. Could that be a paraphrase of the meaning of again there?
So at this moment, it's pretty hard for me to paraphrase this sentence as another one in which repetition, the meaning of repetition is contained. Yeah.
So if the meaning, here's maybe a way in. If the meaning of again in something like he's again not an idiot, if that can be paraphrased as something like, despite what you seem to think and what is implied in what you just said to me, he's not an idiot, then maybe you can see that as a sort of counter-directional reading, right? So you've told me he's an idiot. I am reversing that and telling you he's not an idiot. But that would
I see your point.
So, but that would need some very tricky working out, I think.
Okay.
Certainly not. And also, if one wanted to go that road, one would want to understand why that's clearly not possible in English. Again, can't be used that way in English at all. And you might expect that it could. So there would have to be something quite fine-grained to say about the syntax and semantics of speech acts, which I don't know.
So Vanessa just say he's not an idiot anyway. So you mean in Mandarin Chinese or in English? So what do you mean? Can you say something now? No? Oh, in Mandarin. Yeah, he not an idiot. He again not an idiot. Okay. All right.
So the question is whether the English rendering could be he's not an idiot anyway. So that's not, for me, that anyway is not really felicitous in quite that circumstance. So I don't think that quite works as a paraphrase into English. I'm not I think the most natural way of me rendering this sentence into English would use intonation to signal the same meaning. He's not an idiot, very exaggerated, a kind of tune that I don't know what that is, but some sort of contrastive topic or something. Meaning, I think that targets the meaning. So I think there's quite a different rendering in English, I think.
So Vanessa said there's no meaning of again or repetition included. No? Yeah. All
really,
right.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? All right. So let's thank Professor Andrew Weir again for his talk. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the great questions. Really enjoyed it.